What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdeljabbar. What's up, Danny? How are you?
Chilling, man, as per usual. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well. I don't think I have much banter right now.
Yeah, man. It's also kind of late, so
Yeah,
it's like, what, 10 o'clock at night here?
It's super late, 10 o'clock at night. Oh, come on. We record at like 2 in the morning, bro.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to.
We never sleep.
We don't sleep.
No.
We do this at the crack of dawn to give you guys content. No, it's about 10:18 p.m. on Thursday, the 22nd, I think, right? Or 22nd?
Yep, 22.
2 days after Hitler's birthday, 420.
Happy 420.
Happy 420.
For the weed reason, not for the Hitler reason.
Yeah, I don't smoke weed. I don't celebrate Hitler either. But, yeah, it is Thursday, and this will be released on Sunday. So who knows what we say will be relevant at the time. I mean, we may all be in some type of nuclear holocaust.
We might be dead. Yeah.
We might be dead by the time we release this podcast. So
that is a possibility.
If we all died, and if you're listening to this on Sunday, sorry about that. Sorry that this is out of date. But I want to follow up on our last episode real quick, where we spoke about the lead up to the current situation that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Putin just delivered his State of the Union address.
Yeah, I saw that.
Or the federal, the address to the Federal Assembly, and he issued some pretty stern warnings not to cross the red line. I actually have the quote up. I want to read it real quick.
Go for it.
He said, "Russia wants good relations, including, by the way, those with whom we have not been getting along lately.
The U.S.
Mildly, we really do not want to burn bridges." Obviously, he's talking about a combination of Kiev, the United States, and NATO. But here's where it gets interesting. "But if someone mistakes our good intentions for indifference or weakness and intends to burn down or even blow up these bridges, they should know that Russia's response will be asymmetrical, swift, and tough. Those behind provocations that threaten the core interests of our security will regret what they have done in a way they have not regretted anything for a long time. At the same time, I just have to make it clear we have enough patience, responsibility, professionalism, self-confidence." All right, you get the point. What he said is that if you support any type of military response in Ukraine or try to bring the Ukraine into NATO or follow Zelensky's political rhetoric of taking back Crimea, then there'll be some type of response by Russia.
Yeah, but hold on. Because, did he say that explicitly? Because everything
he didn't say that.
Yeah, because, we're inferring that, but the thing is that I think he did both a good job and a bad job at is that he was very nondescript about what those red lines were. He didn't make the Obama mistake of saying, "Hey, if you go into Syria, that's a red line. That's a red line." And then he crossed the red line and we didn't do shit about it, so it made him look like a little bitch. So in one way, he did a good job at not being explicit about what those red lines are. But in another way, it just makes him sound like dumb. What red line do you mean? What are we crossing,
Well, that's the mess they got into in
Pony
2014.
Up.
Because they didn't totally follow through with any type of, actual military response into Ukraine. They didn't...
Right.
Besides putting some special commandos and they annexed Crimea, but their military was already there.
Right.
So they didn't
it wasn't a big
really
military
invade the
move,
Ukraine.
Right.
They just had some special forces in there, assisting with the separatists and stuff like that. So it was kind of, not a total military response. However, I think they're just trying to keep their options open. Putin's a guy who is, I think, intentionally vague at times because he wants to be able to kind of weigh out every single situation. He's very, very Tyrion Lannister-like.
Yep, very much, yeah.
When we did that episode,
I'm wearing a Thrones shirt right now, actually. Funny enough.
Oh, we did an episode back in the day with world leaders as Game of Thrones characters, and Putin was who we assigned Tyrion Lannister to.
Tywin.
Tywin. Oh, yeah, excuse me.
Tywin
Tywin
Lannister.
Lannister, not Tyrion Lannister, the father. But the U.S., their response, here's something that's interesting. So a week ago, the U.S. intelligence community released their annual briefing on Russia. And what they said was, we assess that Russia does not want a direct conflict with the U.S. forces. Russian officials have long believed that the United States is conducting its own influence campaigns to undermine Russia, weaken Putin, and install Western-friendly regimes in the states of the former Soviet Union and elsewhere. Russia seeks an accommodation with the United States on mutual non-interference in both countries, domestic affairs, and U.S. recognition of Russia's claimed sphere of influence over much of the former Soviet Union. Talk about a candid response. Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe how open they were about that.
Yeah.
That's actually an assessment of the ground of what's going on.
Yep. So, like,
But,
why are we drumming up all this, like, saber rattling about it? Then, why is it such a problem? If Putin says we're not trying to make a problem, and our intelligence agencies say Russia's not trying to make a problem, why are we trying to make a problem?
Well, I think there's a lot of different. I think there's two primary reasons right now. One of the reasons is very partisan. The other reason is bipartisan. The reason I think the first reason, this is the lesser of the two reasons. I think that
The partisan reason.
the partisan reason is that the Democrats hate Russia and they don't want to ever give up they don't want to get over the 2016 narrative that Russia hacked the election.
Okay.
So there's like this partisan resentment there from the Democrats. But the bipartisan reason is like the real reason.
Right.
Which is that having a threat is a reason to increase your military spending.
Which is a reason to increase money.
It's the reason to have a bunch of goofy projects like what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that should be
However,
pretty interesting.
the EU foreign policy chief, he recently came out and said that it would only take one spark to set off a war. So he's kind of leading up a kind of Gavrilo Princip type situation before World War I, which honestly could be true. There probably could be one terrible thing that goes wrong before a chain reaction goes out of control. I think this is, like when I said at the end of last episode, I think this conflict right here between Russia and Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine right now, is probably the most dangerous in the world.
Yeah.
As far as just like worldwide terrible consequences. The closest conflict that would bring about some type of major world war. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't believe that's likely to happen. If there was one conflict to pick, this would be the conflict. It would be that one.
And I'd agree with the likelihood being still super slim. Just, using one example of like in Syria when, we had a couple of conflicts with U.S. troops and Russian troops, kind of like butting heads in the same crowded battle space, and everybody was like, oh my God, like the fucking Humvees crashed into each other of Russia and the United States. We're going to go to war. It's like, no.
Yeah, I know.
No, we're not. like both.
Also media clicks as well.
Yeah, totally. But like both parties are smart enough not to do something stupid. And they're both, I think, strangely enough, I kind of agree with what Putin said. I think, he said that, they have enough, to quote him, enough patience, responsibility, professionalism, self-confidence, and certainty in our cause. Like, I think both sides are patient, both sides are responsible-ish, and both sides are definitely professional. And they know that, little shit is to be ignored. It would take something pretty big, I think. to launch.
Well, here's the thing: you have to have strong talk for the plebs.
Right.
This is their mentality. It's like we need to act tough in front of the plebs.
Yep.
But if shit goes down, we actually have to deal with the consequence. Like we have to deal with the political unraveling.
Right.
And people, there is going to be someone to blame. There's going to be a scapegoat. George Bush's legacy was completely destroyed after that.
Mm-hmm.
After I mean, didn't really have a legacy to begin with, but his legacy is that of a completely failed president who had neocons hijack his presidency.
Right.
Now, there's obviously a reason to saber rattle as far as defense spending and things like that, but no realistic person within the Pentagon or in the Kremlin actually wants to go to war. Everyone knows a war would be devastating. Interestingly enough, Douglas McGregor was on Tucker Carlson the other day, and he was saying how the U.S. does not want to go to war there at all. And he says, I don't even think the U.S. could beat Russia in a conventional war, like let alone nuclear war, in that region of the world on their border. I don't think the U.S. is the favorite in that war.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of things to say about that.
That guy is a legit bona fide genius.
Yeah,
when it comes to that type of stuff.
Totally, and I think that's pretty huge to go on a on a conservative network, and say to that audience like, hey, not only do we not want to go to war, but like we probably won't win, in a conventional war. Like that's you gotta have some fucking balls to say that,
Well, you have to remember what Russia is. I promise this is going to lead into the main topic when I say this. Russia's nuclear policy is, even if they're ever losing a war, so if they're ever losing a conventional war, their nuclear policy is to resort to nuclear weapons.
Right.
Now,
I'm sure ours is too, but we've just never lost a conventional war at that scale.
I mean, we'll use nuclear warheads just for like a country nationalizing like a fucking industry resource. Like, oh, you're nationalizing oil in your country, we're gonna nuke you. You're talking about splitting, forming a super Arab state, we're gonna nuke Baghdad. So most policies in the U.S. related to nuclear weapons were actually developed during the very early years of the Cold War. So we're talking about the 1950s and the 60s. And since then, weapons technology has radically changed. So the current policies that we have right now, they still reflect the technical limitations that we had, decades ago.
Yep.
And nuclear weapons, they're really not about national security anymore. They're not even about world dominance anymore. Before it makes nuclear weapons obviously makes sense to most people as a deterrent. Like someone's not going to attack you because they're at risk of having their entire civilization destroyed.
Right.
It also makes sense in a Machiavellian way as well, because if you have nuclear weapons or more nuclear weapons, then you have the ability to push around states that don't have nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. And if you're up against folks with nuclear weapons, either the same amount or a comparable amount, then we have that principle of mutually assured destruction, where you don't fuck with me, I don't fuck with you, because both of us are armed to the teeth with nukes. And that's the standoff that we have right now with Russia.
Yeah, well, going back to deterrence.
Right.
Like most industries, though, within the defense sector, it's more about other factors. It's not even about that.
Yep.
It's about profiteering. It's about competing budgets between military branches, and also about local economic development at the end. I mean, that's how they persuade states and communities and constituents to support these types of policies.
Congressional districts,
Which ultimately results in this very weird, outdated policy that is not only expensive, but also really puts a lot of us at a potential risk, especially people who are located near a nuclear silo that is meant to launch ballistic missiles at other countries. And the last thing that we want to do is turn into the guy from, you ever see RoboCop?
The original one or the new one?
The original RoboCop?
Yeah, but I was like a kid. I don't really remember.
Okay, you're not going to get this reference. I was going to say the guy who crashes his truck into like this toxic waste silo.
I vaguely
remember
that.
And he comes out. You remember this part?
Vaguely, yeah.
Oh, and he comes out like, "Whoa!" And his skin's melting off. And then a car hits him and he just liquefies.
Yeah, so...
He just liquefies.
What are you trying to say, that folks that live near a nuclear silo are going to turn into the RoboCop guy?
What I'm trying to say is that if you're within the, if a nuclear bomb drops on you, hopefully it will drop on your head. You won't be 30 miles out of, I don't know what the actual blast radiuses are and what the effects are, but
we'll play around with that after the show.
Radius, yeah. Hopefully you're not within the radius where it like only melts off your skin and you're still alive. But what we want to focus on today is our fleet of ICBMs. And I don't know, maybe you can define what an ICBM is, because you're much better at this military tech stuff than I am.
Yeah, totally. So ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. And there's also based Intercontinental Range Ballistic Missiles, which are like kind of subversions. And basically it's a missile. It's classified as a missile that has a minimum range of at least 5,500 kilometers, which is like 3,400 miles. The majority of the intercontinental ballistic missiles that we have right now exceed that by quite a bit. But basically it's a fucking rocket, right? It's a rocket. And they're primarily used for nuclear warheads delivery, but it could be used for other things too. Things like space. Like I wasn't kidding when I said it's a rocket. It's literally a rocket ship, right? Like the same rocket or similar rocket technology that you would see, launching satellites into space. Same thing is an intercontinental ballistics missiles. Perfect example of this. We have just a limited number of countries have ICBMs. There's Russia, the U.S., China, France, India, the UK, and North Korea, which brings me to my example. North Korea has been developing their ICBM technology over the last forever. And, they've been at war with Atlantis, testing their fucking rockets and shooting them into the ocean. And basically they've been using the guise of saying, oh no, this isn't intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are for launching, weather satellites, right? Because you could use it for a weather satellite. It's literally the same delivery system, right? And so an intercontinental ballistic missile is basically a device that you can use in a nuclear capacity to strike someone from very far away. And the way that it works is just like a rocket ship, like I've been saying before. It launches up into space, and it travels through the vacuum of space and then falls back down on its target super far away. And that's the way that it works. And it's been the preferred method of delivering weapons, especially nuclear weapons, since the Cold War, because of the limitations of the day, right? So when we were in the height of the Cold War, we had, you could drop a nuclear bomb, from a plane, and that's the way that it was done. The only two times that it was used in war, Fat Man and Little Boy on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the problem with that is that, planes have limited range. They're super slow. You can shoot them out of the sky, things like that. You could also, launch them out of a submarine, right? But at that time, the submarines were kind of like clunky, and it was hard to communicate with them securely, when they're out at sea or underwater. So not a super useful rapid method of delivering weapon systems. And so the best option during the height of the Cold War was an intercontinental ballistic missile. You just have a bunch of silos everywhere, and these things could, hit Russia or pretty much anywhere within a 5,000 to 6,000 mile range in like 30 minutes or so. And you could phone it in. The nuclear football travels around with the president everywhere he goes, and he can plug in his codes and say, go ahead and launch the missiles from pretty much anywhere.
Well, you heard what happened with Joe Biden, right?
What? I haven't heard. What?
So I can't believe it really wasn't reported that much, but apparently Joe Biden mistook the football with his life alert. And he almost ended up launching a nuclear missile.
Well, thankfully, the codes for the ballistic missile and his
it
life
almost
alert
got through all the fail safes.
His life alert is a little bit more easy to use than the football. I hope.
Let's actually pull this back a little bit,
Yeah.
because you actually brought up an article to me prior to us talking about this from the 2016 debate with Trump.
Yeah, sure.
When there was a question about the nuclear triad, and Donald Trump clearly doesn't know what it is.
Oh, I've got the quotes. I really want to quote it because it's just
Okay,
hilarious.
quote it.
All right, so this guy who was moderating at the time, it's a right-wing radio host, Hugh Hewitt, and he asked the question to Trump. He says, "Mr. Trump, Dr. Carson just referenced the single most important job of the president, the command and control and the care of our nuclear forces." And he mentioned the Triad. The B-52s are older than I am. The missiles are old. The submarines are aging out. It's an executive order. It's a commander-in-chief decision. What's your priority among the nuclear triad? And the answer, holy shit.
That's a question that would only ever be asked at a Republican primary debate.
Yeah, of course.
That would never be asked at a Democratic primary debate.
Yeah. So in one way, it was kind of a gotcha question because, you wouldn't see this at a Democratic debate probably, but still.
That question would just be about how do you prioritize oppressed groups in the LGBTQ or community? That would be
that's
that would be
a bit of a
worded that
stretch.
way.
We're getting off topic. The point though is that the question I think is kind of relevant, right? But the answer was stunningly, phenomenally off topic by Trump, and I'll try and read it, but I'm gonna have to skip over a lot of it because a lot of it is just nonsense. So the answer, and I'm not going to do the Trump voice because I'll lose it after a while.
Yeah, nuclear bombs.
Okay.
Hey, you're good.
Hey,
you got us one will too.
So he says, well, first of all, I think we need somebody absolutely that we can trust, who is totally responsible, who really knows what he or she is doing.
The best guys.
That is so powerful and so important. And one of the things I'm frankly proud of is that in 2003, 2004, I was totally against going to Iraq because you're going to destabilize the Middle East. I called it very strongly, and it was very important. But we have to be extremely vigilant and extremely careful when it comes to nuclear. Nuclear changes the whole ballgame. Frankly, I would have said, get out of Syria. Get out. If we didn't have the weaponry today, the power is so massive that we can't just leave areas that 50 or 75 years ago we wouldn't care. It was hand-to-hand combat. The biggest problem with the world today is that President Obama, with global warming, which is inconceivable, this is what he's saying. I can't. He goes on for another 2 or 3 sentences, and none of it makes any fucking sense. And then he ends it by saying, that's, in my opinion, the single biggest problem our country faces today. And he just doesn't mention the nuclear triad at all. He just goes on this weird ass rant. Yeah.
And then Marco Rubio's like, can I? He's raising his hand in the back.
He's like, can I? He wanted to mansplain to everybody, all the viewers at home, what the nuclear triad
the nuclear triad is our ability to launch nuclear warheads in 3 specific ways. It is the 3 pillars, and he's like,
right, and he's like airplanes and missiles and submarines, and it's like, oh, cool, you get a brownie, Marco Rubio. You know what the nuclear triad is.
Honestly, I feel more comfortable with the guy who doesn't know what it is.
You know what?
Most
kind
Americans
of do I.
don't.
So
know
do
it.
I. Kind of.
Because this guy's thinking about it, and he has his fucking. At this time, Trump wasn't as ingrained in the MIC as he ended up being as a president. But Rubio, of course, is an MIC guy.
Yeah, he's a shit.
So of course he fucking
So like his response was just like hard eye roll. It's like, yes, you were correct. You know what the nuclear triad is. You think you're scoring points on Trump because he clearly doesn't know what it is. But in actuality, when you look at it, the fact that he's,
most people don't know what it is. It's not something that most people know.
Exactly. And
it's like no shame in not knowing our.
Totally. And he makes a mistake, in my opinion, right? Because he says at the end of Rubio says at the end of his like mansplaining rant about what the nuclear triad is, he says all three, and he's in this case he's talking about the legs of the nuclear triad. He says all three are critically important, and that's when I realized, especially after doing this the research for this episode, that he was totally wrong. Right? They're not critically important. All three of them aren't critically important. That's how I know that was the answer that would come from an MIC shill. Right, like let's call a spade.
Well, let's actually pull this back a little bit because I think it's important to kind of give like a brief history of what these three pillars are.
Yep.
Because when we first started dropping nukes, the first two nukes and only nukes that we dropped, the only way to drop these or deliver these warheads was by plane,
by an airplane. Mm-hmm.
So, such as the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
They were dropped by planes.
Mm-hmm.
Or, the problems with using bombers is pretty self-evident. So, you have to spend time flying to the target to drop the bomb.
Right.
And
you often have to stop and refuel a bunch of times if you're going across the world, right?
Well, the more obvious one as well is that the plane can be shot down.
Right. Yeah. At any point, from where it started to where it's going, it could get shot down. And plus, it's super limited in range. I mean, nowadays we have the ability to refuel in midair, but even that has its limitations. And so you got to really think about like how far can you go on a tank of gas, and then you also have to come back. You know what I mean? So you have to factor like the return flight in on your calculations on how far out you can go. So that means when you fly one of these sorties to like put a nuclear weapon down on someone, you have to like cut whatever the range of the airplane is in half because you have to turn around,
Well, what the U.S. did to mitigate this is that they always had bombers up.
Yep.
So there was always a bomber in the air with nuclear warheads in the case that there was attack on. If there was a Russian attack on America, or more likely a Russian attack on a U.S. base, then there would be a bomber in the air at all times that would go and
they'd be like gassed up and ready to go, right?
Yeah, they would be in the air and then they would fly to the predetermined target and then they would drop their bombs.
Mm-hmm.
But around the same time, though, it was in the 50s, and in the 50s, they started developing, the ICBMs, and then, the nuclear warheads that they brought that they could have on the field. Both the Soviets and the U.S., I believe they made them around the same time. I'm not really sure who came. I'm not an expert on this. I think the U.S. came up with them first, but I think they were on the field around the same time.
What, ICBMs?
ICBMs. Do you know that?
That's a tricky story because, like I said, intercontinental ballistic missiles are basically just like we stole the idea from the Germans.
Yeah,
like this, like the V2 rockets. So it's kind of hard to. It really just depends on what we want to consider as the first ICBM, because technically the Germans have had them for a long time. So the V2s, but as far as like nuclear delivery systems, I don't know. Hard to tell.
I mean, regardless, they had these around the same time.
Yeah. It's almost irrelevant because we both ended up having it. Yeah.
And I mean, I guess with this now, it only takes 30 minutes to hit a target, and these missiles can travel about 6,000 miles or more.
Oh yeah, yeah. And actually, I got some conflicting evidence for how far they can go. So for the ones that we were using, so there's this Minuteman 3s that we're using, the LGM 30s, Minuteman 3s. They're cheap-ish, I want to say, and trust me, they ain't cheap. They're $7 million a pop, but like relative to some of the other things that I'd like to talk about, it's relatively cheap. They fly Mach 23, so fucking fast. That's hypersonic, and I want to talk about that later. And they can go anywhere between 6,000 and 13,000 mile range. I got a lot of conflicting data on this particular point, and we have 530 in service. So,
well, let's talk about the submarines, because the submarines I think are what kind of.
Well, let's save the subs for last. Let's talk about the bombers instead. So let's wrap up the ICBMs, talk about the bombers, and let's do subs first. So last couple bits on ICBMs. So ICBMs technically can be launched on land, in silos, on trucks, or in a submarine. But the most famous ones that are in our nuclear triad are the silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. And like I said, the Minuteman III is the one that everyone thinks about, because that's the one that are currently in service, and that we have like over 500 of them in service. The other one, just talking about planes for a bit, and I'll nerd out for a bit here. There's a bunch of different bombers that we use, and these are strategic long-range bombers. And the oldest ones, the oldest one is the B-52 Stratofortress, right? It's old as dirt, but it's super reliable. We're talking about 1950s tech. The range is pretty long, though, at like 8.8 thousand miles, right? So it can go pretty far. But again, you have to remember it has to go in one direction and then turn around and come back the other way. So really the effective range would be about half of that distance, right? So 4,000 miles. It's still pretty fucking long, though, right? But it's also slow as hell. It's like Mach 0.8, so supersonic, 650 miles an hour. So you do the math, 650 miles an hour. It's going to take hours and hours and hours to get, a full 4,000 miles. So
it seems like planes are irrelevant then when it comes to nuclear warfare.
But you know what? They're useful because you can put a lot of bombs in them. So in this case, the B-2 Stratofortress can hold up to 70,000 pounds of bombs.
So what? We're carpet bombing?
You could bomb the shit out of people
with nuclear bombs.
You could.
Isn't the point of a nuclear bomb is you only need like one?
Well, so it depends on the nuclear bomb, because they all have different blast yields. But the point though is that you can
all the blast yields of these things like the smallest nukes, like the first nukes that came out. If you dropped them in Manhattan, it would basically take out pretty much all of central Manhattan, right?
All right, well, proposition, right? Pre-ICBMs, we only had planes, right? And we had subs, but nothing that was able to launch like an ICBM or anything like that. So you've got a plane. Do you want to just put one bomb in there, or do you want to stock it full of as many fucking bombs as you can, including both nuclear and conventional? So like this thing it's called a Stratofortress for a reason. It's literally a fortress. I mean, 70,000 pounds of payload is like 140, 500-pound bombs, right? And it could also carry some pretty heavy bombs, like large, giant yield bombs. So, like I said, there are different classifications and different yields of nuclear warheads, and this thing can carry the biggest ones, the absolute largest, biggest ones. Then after that, the B-1 Lancer came around. That was like 70s, 80s tech. So it's still pretty old, but actually they're still in service, believe it or not. It's supersonic, but barely. Mach 1.25 for some variants, and only at high altitude. But at least it can move faster than the other one. It has reasonable range at 8,000 miles on a single tank. Payload is less than the Superfortress. I think probably they made up for it with the speed, but something like 24 to 40 bombs or missiles, depending on the variant. But it can also hold up to 5,000 pound bombs, right? So that's kind of the big boy bombs, like the big boy nukes are going to be in that size. These guys are about $200 million per unit, which, as far as like the rest of these planes I'm about to talk about, is pretty affordable, and we've been using them pretty reliably for a while. But it was the B-2 Stratofortress that Hugh Hewitt was saying is older than him. And it's true, and it's kind of surprising that we still use them. Now, later on, we start getting some pretty cool tech, and that's the B-2 Spirit. So this is a 5th-generation airframe with just shit ton of technology. It is from like the 80s and early 90s. stealth capable, right? So we're talking about like a fixed wing, like that's the bat wing looking one. If you don't know what it looks like, they're dope. So it's a fixed delta wing, and it's just stealth and all black and super cool looking.
And just stealth means that the plane goes invisible like Wonder Woman, right?
No, it doesn't. Stealth means that it is nearly invisible for radar. So what that means is when there's a thing called a radar cross section, and that is how large an object shows up on a radar screen. And so by using clever technology, stealth technology, you can trick a radar into thinking that something that's the size of a fucking plane, a bomber, is maybe the size of a couch, And because it's so damn small, nobody really knows, well, what the fuck is that? Is that an enemy threat? Is that just a bird? What is it, So they kind of fly under the radar, so to speak. But they have a lower range at less than 7,000 kilometers, but they can do mid-air refueling, so that can bring it up to 10,000 miles. But that's also tricky and dangerous in general. And these things are fucking expensive, $737 million per unit. But the total cost of them, when you include spare parts and maintenance and all this other stuff, can be up to $2 billion a pop. Very, very expensive plane. And good payload, like probably about 80 or so like GPS guided bombs, or 16 fairly large 2,400-pound bombs, but also pretty slow, like sub-supersonic, so Mach 0.09.
Man, that's like 5 times more expensive than what F-35s are going for now.
Yeah.
F-35s are like 120 a pop.
But at least these things stay in the air, so
yeah, I guess so.
But yeah, I mean they're very expensive, but they're not meant for us to buy a lot of units of these. Like the point for these is like to buy a handful and use them in they're strategic bombers. Like this is not like our defense fleet or anything like that. And then not out yet, but we're Northrop Grumman, same guys who made the B-2 Spirit, are building the B21 Raider. It's not out yet, so I don't really have very much to say about it. But from what I've learned, Northrop got the contract in 2015. It should be out in a couple of years, so like sometime around 2026. Probably not, though, because let's be honest, they never stay on schedule. They'll probably blame the coronavirus or some shit like that. And it's definitely going to be a stealth wing, just like the B-2. The payload, the range are obviously unclear because it's not out yet, but it'll probably be comparable to the B-2 Spirit. Maybe get some bumps up from that. I honestly think that as much as I love planes, this is probably going to be an underwhelming plane. I bet it'll have a shit ton of technology in it, like the F-35. I bet it's going to be extremely expensive, and I bet that it'll be able to put like a massive amount of ordnance down, but like it'll just be kind of like a dumb idea, for reasons that we'll go over in a minute. But I found this quote. It says that the Air Force's initial plans were to acquire 80 to 100 LRSB aircraft. So this is the classification of aircraft that this is, at a cost of $500 million per unit. And I just lulled super hard at that because like they're not going to get them at $500 million, $550 million a unit. Like there's not. The B-2 Spirit is $737 million per unit by itself. Like with everything all in, with everything together, it's like $2 billion a pop. There's no way that they're getting this at $550 million.
Oh yeah, there's no way, and especially if it's coming out in 2026.
2026. Yeah, not even. There's no fucking way.
Or I mean, the plan relaunch is 2026. There's absolutely no way. It'll probably close. I bet it'll be $1 billion a unit.
Minimum.
But Jesus Christ. All right. So the point of this episode, and I just kind of want to redirect where we're going with this. So we're talking about how a lot of our nuclear defense industry is also ingrained in this like MIC welfare state, and ICBMs are a really big culprit. Right. And ICBMs are here's my opinion on this, and you can just take it from here because
Sure.
you know more about this stuff than I do. ICBMs were basically made defunct by nuclear submarines, weren't they?
Basically. And do you want to continue with that, or should I?
No,
tell you why?
I mean, you go on and take this from here because I don't really know too much about nuclear subs or anything like that. I just know that when they first, here's what I know about them. So when they first came out in like the 50s and 60s, or when submarines started carrying nukes, the disadvantage was that they, I guess at the time the submarines didn't know where they were exactly, so they didn't know how far they were from their potential targets. But then once the submarine technology increased, and they were more effective and much better because you're not able to locate them. Like they're basically impenetrable underwater. You can't find them. Like you can't.
Or good luck finding them. Really.
Good luck finding them. If you just want to go to war with Atlantis, like Kim Jong Il,
exactly.
Kim Jong Un.
They'd have an enemy would have a lot of ground to cover to find these. So the idea for putting nukes in submarines and using those as launch vessels for submarines is not new in particular. Like it was always the idea to do it because, as you said, it provides natural cover. It's under the fucking water, right? And you can swim that fucker over wherever you want, and you could get closer to your targets. So the actual weapons that they deliver don't have to have ridiculous ranges like the intercontinental ballistic missiles do. Remember, intercontinental ballistic missiles are kind of expensive and kind of clunky because it's literally a rocket. It's literally a rocket ship. And you shoot it off into space, and everyone can see what you've done because everyone's got satellites nowadays. Yeah, it'll only take 30 minutes to get to its target, but to be honest, there are warning systems that'll be available. They're going to try and shoot it out the sky, and they're always watching the place where we have the missile silos. And strangely enough, and we'll talk about nuclear sponges in general in a second, but strangely enough, everybody knows where these are. Like, you can Google it and you can find out exactly where is the nearest nuclear sponge. Where's the nearest nuclear missile silo for you? And spoiler alert, if you live on the coast, you probably don't have one near you. But if you're in the upper Midwest, you've probably got one in your backyard.
You're probably, if you live in Colorado, Wyoming, I think
South Dakota, North Dakota,
Utah, the upper Midwest, those areas, and they bring. Obviously, it sounds crazy on surface. Like, hey, do you want to live near a place that it's there to be the target of a nuclear strike?
I don't know. I don't know a ton of people from the Midwest, but I'd imagine that most people don't even think about it. They don't.
No,
even
I wouldn't think about it. If someone told me this, there was one in New York. The whole purpose of having a sponge is to spare New York City.
Right. Talk about the coastal
while
elites
sacrificing Jackson, Wyoming. That's the whole point of having it.
Bit,
is
right.
to
you
have
should be super pissed off about
less
that if you
populated
live in those
areas. Your less populated areas take the blunt of the nuclear force, but
we'll get there in a second.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll get there in a second. So back to subs. The point, though, is that at the time, around the 50s, it was hard to communicate with subs, especially in a manner that was secure, right, and consistent. So that really wasn't a viable option. So they built all of these ICBMs. But really, once our sub technology just caught up and we made them nuclear, it is just unfathomable that we don't invest more money into subs. And so we have three main types of subs right now. There are attack subs, which are armed to the teeth, and they're primarily used for ship-to-ship combat, so including other subs, smaller warships, and even commercial freighters. We'll blow up anything with those guys. These are the types of subs that aggressively hunt in the oceans. You can think of them like kind of sharks, Then we also have cruise missile subs. And cruise missile subs are partly meant for ship-to-ship warfare, but specifically against larger military vessels, things like carriers and destroyers and stuff. But as the name implies, they carry cruise missiles Those have sea to sea and sea to land capabilities. So you can use a cruise missile sub to attack a target in the water or attack a target on land. I'm not certain if they can attack targets in the air or not. I'm supposed if they were properly outfitted, they could, but let's just assume for lack of information that they don't really attack the sky. But then we have the third type, which is a ballistic missile sub. And this is the type of sub that really just makes ICBMs totally obsolete. Now, the particular type of submarine that we want to talk about for ballistic missile subs are the Ohio-class subs. And the Ohio-class subs are nuclear-powered submarines. We have 14 of them that are ballistic missile submarines and 4 of them which are cruise missile submarines. Each of them displace a lot. They're probably the largest submarines ever built for the U.S. Navy, but I think they're the third largest submarines in general. The Russians have 2 types of submarines that are bigger, but ours are way, way better. They're about $2 billion a pop, so keep that number in mind, right? It costs about as much as a fully loaded B-2 bomber. However, they've been in commission since the early 80s, so they're a bit older than the B-2 bombers, but they're nuclear powered, which means that their range, and I was looking up the specs on this, it literally said it limited only by food supplies, which is just hilarious, right? Like they could go on and on and on forever, basically. And the only times they ever have to stop is
for
to
someone
get food.
who might be confused by a nuclear sub and a sub that's holding nuclear warheads
and nuclear powered. Sub. Right.
That's a good. Explain what it is real quick.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good distinction. A nuclear-powered sub means that the propulsion systems, like how the thing moves, is powered by a nuclear reactor, which sounds insane, but it's a thing. Pretty much all of our largest warships and all of our submarines for sure are nuclear-powered, and that means that the energy that is used to propel the ships and move them and power the ships, like guidance systems and all that other stuff, are all electric, and they're all powered by this like little mini, hopefully not a Chernobyl, and so the cool thing
there's
about
not
that,
like some dirty guy in the back with like a shovel with his shirt off pouring coal into.
Yeah, no, and it's not like a diesel. So more commonly, we haven't used coal-fired anything. For
I
a
know.
while.
I'm just saying.
No.
That's kind of like the image you get when powering a ship at like some British
that's
guy.
not happening. No. But more commonly, like a lot of countries use diesel-powered ships. So you have a generator that's powered by diesel, and they're usually pretty powerful, right? And they'll turn the propulsion systems, but they also create electricity, which powers the ship. But the thing about those is that it's fucking gas, right? So like, and the gas mileage on them probably sucks too. So
yeah, imagine fucking gas mileages on a submarine.
What's the gas mileage on a Russian submarine? I don't know.
What's the gas mileage on like a fishing boat, dude?
I don't know.
It's awful, man. That's like everyone who has a boat. I think every guy goes through like a bit of like a little fantasy. He's like, I want to save up for a boat.
I'm gonna buy
like, you know what I mean? Like
until you find out how much gas costs.
I really would want a boat. And you're like, maybe you like look online and be like, oh, how much is a boat? Oh, it's only $40,000 for this boat. Maybe I can get it. I'll have enough disposable income to get a boat. I'll be a guy with a boat. And then you'll speak to somebody who has a boat, and they'll be like, oh, man, I spent fucking $20,000 on gas this year. I'm like, all right, I'm not getting a boat.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, so going back to that, nuclear power enables you to go on pretty much forever, right? I think the operating lifespan is like 80 years or something like that before you have to change out the fuel, which is basically forever, right? We'll probably never use a ship for that long. So it's only limited by the food, right? So as opposed to the airplanes, right, which have to stop for gas every now and again, this thing can just go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And it moves around, so it's not a static target like an ICBM, right? It's not sitting in Minot Air Force Base, it's just, it moves around and it's hidden and you don't know where it is. And the difference, as you asked, between a nuclear-powered sub and a submarine that has nuclear weapons is just that, right? the first, when we say a nuclear powered sub, when we say a nuclear sub, we mean a nuclear powered sub. It just happens to have some weapons on it that are nuclear capable. So where was I on Ohio?
It's double nuclear. Subs? That's the term they should
double
use.
Nuclear. Yeah.
Double nuclear. Nuclear powered and nuclear warheads.
All right. So Ohio class subs. The last bit I'll say on this is that their payload is pretty awesome. So the newest variants will carry 24 Trident IIs. These are ballistic missiles. And I'll talk about those in a second. And up to half of them could be nuclear tipped. So we're talking about 12 nuclear weapons on one submarine. You know, you could potentially put way more than that in a B-2 bomber, but they're slow, they're loud, you can shoot them out of the sky, they have to stop for refueling. You know, there's a whole slew of problems. And it's still better than ICBMs because, well, I'll talk more about that in a second. So one thing that's super interesting about this, that's kind of a tragedy, is that the Ohio-class submarines are expected to be retired by 2029. That's only 8 years from now.
So what is going to be the successor of the Ohio-class subs?
So that part's not clear, and I'm sure that there are a bunch of, like military contractors like salivating to get their hands on a contract to be the next, nuclear submarine producers. But we're expected to change them out. I mean, there's no way that the United States Navy is going to not have like ballistic missile subs. We're definitely going to have them, but I just don't know what they're going to be. There's not a whole lot of information on that yet.
See, like subs is like I think you could really defend the U.S. with a submarine fleet.
Well, that's what Ron Paul thinks. Ron Paul said,
all of my opinions come from Ron Paul.
Ron Paul. Yeah, Ron Paul was let's pull out of every single base in the world and let's stop investing in ridiculous military shit. But you know what? He was like, submarines are cool. We can build more submarines. and I agree with him. I mean, it's smart because again, I can't underscore this enough. It's a moving target. You can't find it. It's underwater. You can arm it to the teeth with up to 12 nuclear missiles, and you can get closer to your targets because you just swim up to them. So, your range is extended by quite a bit, as opposed to a intercontinental ballistic missile that's launched from the middle of the United States. Like, you have an operating range, right? It can only go so far unless you make a better missile. So I really like the idea of this as far as a deterrent. And the Trident IIs that they are launching, these are pretty interesting too. They're submarine-launched missiles. They're built by Lockheed Martin Space. They first deployed them in 1990, and they're still in service. These things are expensive. Remember how I said $7 million was reasonably cheap for a intercontinental ballistic missile, the Minuteman IIIs? You want to know how much these things cost?
I don't know, probably around like $25-30 million.
$30.9 million each. But I mean, what's $30 million for protecting the nation, right? Anyway, the range is classified on these technically, but I think the best approximations are like $7,500.
The thing is, though, is that when I hear $30 million, like $30.9 million, it sounds like chump change compared to a lot of the other expenditures that we have in the military.
Of course.
You know what I mean? Like when you compare it with
we're talking about we're talking about a single use item, right? It's one thing to say, the F-35 is $140 million a piece, right? And that sounds like a lot of fucking money, and it is. But the thing is that you can reuse an airplane.
Yeah.
Like you can keep using it, as opposed to a missile. You fire it off once, it's gone. That's it. Kind of like the Tomahawk missiles are like 150K, and we dropped like 64 of them in Syria one day just because, and that's a shit ton of money. Like that's a lot of money, and they expire, right? So we're on the Trident IIs because the Trident I's are out of date. In the same way that we're at Minuteman IIIs because the Minuteman I and the Minuteman IIs, we didn't use them all. They just went out of date. They have an expiration date, and they need to be upgraded every now and again. So that's why we're at that. So the fact that
Do
we
you know
have...
how long the expiration date is? Or do you have an idea? Or did you say it, or did I just miss
I
it?
didn't say it specifically, and unfortunately I did close out my Minuteman map where it was showing like when each of the Minuteman iterations had came out. But I want to say that, well, first of all, we never wait until the expiration date to change the missiles. That's a stupid idea, right? So we always refresh them early, because that would be a really bad idea if we waited too long and they turned out to be duds. But I want to say like every 20 or so years, it seems like we are updating the missile. So basically what we're saying is $30 million a pop. One nuclear sub can carry up to 12 of these that are nuclear powered, right? Or 24 that are conventional. So let's do some math, right? So 30 million. So let's say 30 times 24 per sub is 720 million. So 720 times, how many do we have? 14 subs it's $1 billion. It's $1 billion it's $10 billion. It's $10 billion that we're going to either use and then that's it, they're gone, or not use and we're just going to end up scrapping them and replacing them in like 10 to 20 years. So it's kind of a money suck. It's kind of a money pit. A little bit.
Yeah. It's a prime money pit.
It's a lot of money. It's not a small amount of money. And this is just for like one thing, like there's the military has like probably 500 of these things that, have expiration dates and cost millions of dollars each. And, either we use them or we lose them kind of deal. You know what I mean? So
It's better use them.
No, that's not a good idea. All right. So this thing, the Trident IIs, the Range.
That's the mentality, though. It's like, man, we bought this thing.
Might as well go to war, right?
I mean, come on. Who's bad? Just anyone. Who's bad in this world? Come on. Right. Isn't there some new jihad group? Come on. Why don't we just make one up then? You can totally, if you think in that way.
Yeah.
If you just think like a business, like just think like you're trying to raise the shares of Lockheed Martin, or just think about it in this Machiavellian view. You're like, man, we really need to sell these missiles. They cost so much to make and create. Man, we need to find someone to use them on. There's no one else to use them on. That's the problem.
They're going to expire.
Man. Isn't there a way to make? Come on, isn't there some group in the African world or the East, one of those jihad groups? Come on, think of one. Come on, let's brainstorm. Let's think of one of these jihad groups. Come on, what is it? Boko Haram. The Boko Haram. They sound kind of mean. Let's
Jesus, and that's just you joke, but that's kind of what goes on in the MIC right now. Well,
which one's the good guy in Yemen? Is it the Houthis or is it the other one they're fighting? The other one they're fighting is Al Qaeda. This is a tough decision. We can probably get away with bombing them both. Good plan.
We used twice the number of bombs. No.
The government over there declared war on one of those. Oh, so they want to buy us. Oh, this is perfect. Perfect situation.
So we actually had a guest on a while ago. His name is Christian Sorensen, former Air Force, wrote a really awesome book called Understanding the War Industry. And I definitely recommend it for anyone who's interested in these topics, because, we're joking here about how someone in Lockheed or in the military industrial complex, generally speaking, might
why
think
they would
about
fund a think tank or fund a publication or
Right.
plant the seed money for a group like PNAC that
Right.
would put out these ideas. Because
Exactly.
obviously Lockheed Martin is a technical. They're private companies technically, right? They're not government.
Yeah, but they're not selling anything that we can buy.
They're not government. You don't elect the people don't elect the CEO of Lockheed Martin.
No,
You
but
don't-
we also
there's
don't.
no
We don't buy
democracy.
shit from Lockheed. Like
Yeah,
you and I can't buy a single thing from Lockheed.
Yeah, we
Martin.
don't buy things from Lockheed Martin, but no, they're not part of the government. However, there's a big however.
There's this revolving door whereby military people will do a stint in the military, And then when they retire from the military, they're high up enough where they've made, connections and they've got rapport and stuff like that. And so they'll immediately take a cushy job with Raytheon or Lockheed or Boeing or name any of these companies that build defense contracts. And then they will lobby the military to get those products sold or win contracts, etc. And then they'll also loop in the congressional bit of it, right, where Congress people or sometimes executives at these military these contractors will become or influence, more likely influence, members of Congress so that they can pass laws that are friendly towards the war industry, or friendly towards war in general, because that passively helps out the war industry. And it even gets so fucked up that even ending wars can be profitable for the contractors in the war industry, because they set up all these like clean up after the war services that are incredibly expensive and ridiculous in and of itself. Awesome book, Understanding the War Industry by Kristen Sorensen. Or you can take a listen to our episode that we did with him. That was I feel like that was in November or something like that of last year.
Yeah, Christian's a great guy, so definitely support him by getting his book.
Yeah.
And he's really smart, so listen to the episode. Now, another thing is that, these Lockheed Martin, they will fund, like they'll plant the seed. They planted the seed money for Project of a New American Century. Mm-hmm. A lot of the think tank that came out with a lot of the false information about Saddam Hussein having nuclear weapons underneath his palace, and all sorts of just crazy conspiracy theories that we went to war over. Mm-hmm. They will fund that stuff. So they're they have such a major role in influencing policy. But it's not just that. I want to get back to
the sponge.
To the sponge, because I think this is the main thing that we're trying to tackle today. And I think it's valuable to have the context of our nuclear capability and the United States nuclear policy. But what a nuclear sponge is it sounds like kind of like a technical thing, right? Like it sounds like a nuclear sponge would be part of a missile or something, or
like a device that like cleans up nuclear waste after a.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. But a nuclear sponge is it's supposed to be like a magnet for
not a physical magnet. It's a strategy, really, is what it is.
It's a strategy where you're putting a silo somewhere where it's less populated than, let's say Los Angeles or Manhattan or Washington, D.C. And the point is that when your adversary attacks you in a nuclear war, they send their bombs to your targets,
to your missile silos.
To your missile silos.
And why do they do that? Because they see every missile that you have as a threat. If Russia decided to hit us with a nuke, and let's say they did target, San Francisco or something like that, they could hit San Francisco, but the moment that they did that, we're going to launch all hell at them. So from all of our missile silos, right? Like we're just going to go apeshit. So they're not going to stop at just hitting the target that they intended. They're also going to want to hit every nuclear missile facility that they know about that we have, which again is kind of wild that you can literally Google for this. Like you can find them. It's super easy. It's not like a secret.
So it doesn't take the most sophisticated intelligence unit to figure out where our
it's absolutely not a secret. You can find out.
Heartland.
You can find out. It's so easy. Just Google it. They're all there. There's like pictures and maps and stuff like that. You can see it. You can see it from Google Earth. You can see the fucking silos.
I wish they'd put one of those next to Washington, D.C.
Why?
I'm joking, but not really. But like, if we were gonna sacrifice a city,
So here's the thing: the sponge.
if we were
is
gonna
the sponge.
if we
is
were
a
gonna
strategy.
sacrifice a city, I'm just saying Washington
Washington,
D.C.
would be
probably should be the city that we sacrifice.
I don't know. I'm not really.
I'm not saying I would sacrifice a city. I'm just saying that would be the city to sacrifice. But no, I have family who lives there. I would never obviously want that.
I'd probably go for like Atlantic City, because like it's
Atlantic City.
Yeah, because it's kind of a sad place, or like Niagara Falls.
But you're from Jersey.
Yeah, but it's just
Niagara Falls.
Yeah, those are just kind of
what
the New York side.
The New York side of that is pretty gross.
It's sad.
It's pretty ratchet up in Western New York.
It's kind of sad, dude. But
Western New York, once you realize why Bills fans are the way they are once you travel to Western New York. It's windy, it's cold, and there is nothing of like scenic beauty at all. Like, you don't even really get a good view of Niagara Falls. That's on the Canadian side of the border. It's almost as sad as northern Indiana.
I know nothing about I don't think I've ever been to northern Indiana. I can't speak to that.
Northern Indiana near like Chicago is not beautiful.
Well, I'll have to not go there.
naming parts of the.
Anyway, back to the sponge. So the nuclear sponge
is
again the nuclear sponge is again a strategy, and the strategy is put your missile silos out in the open so that your enemy decides to attack those places instead of the populated places, which is a crazy prospect. And that's the military strategy. But as I think you're probably going to point out here, Henry, there's also like non-military ideas that support this.
The real interesting thing about these sponges is that they're the strategic military value, of course, is to attract missiles in the case of a war. But obviously, there's an entire industry surrounding this. So the local economies, the politicians of these regions, they support these things being there. And the reason why is because they bring jobs. They're big employers to these areas. Mm-hmm. And like how the war industry and how the military industrial complex works. It works on so many different levels. It works politicians, but it also works local governments, and also works it works state governments, because a state government is never going to say dismiss a project or dismiss a company that potentially will bring wages and bring jobs to a specific area.
Yeah, but you know what? And this is again partly myth, because when they do all the work to figure out how many jobs do military contracts, and as an example, ICBMs in 1993, the Pentagon was saying that we should remove ICBMs from the nuclear triad when they were doing their nuclear posture review. So literally, Pentagon saying like, "Hey, we don't need these anymore. We should probably like pull the plug on this." But that was actually attacked, by elements in the Air Force, along with members of Congress in the states where those ICBMs are deployed. So it was bipartisan too. So a group of senators from Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming and Utah were all vehemently opposed to this. So people like Republican Senator John Hooven,
Mitt Romney, Mike Lee,
yep. John
Mike
Barrow,
Lee, who's usually kind of good and stuff, is on it.
Yep. Democrats
John
and
Tester,
Republicans, exactly.
John Tester, who's a Democrat from Montana.
Yep. And so
it's all this stuff is completely. There's no partisan flavor to this type of collusion, with government and business.
Right. So I mean, what they were saying is that their argument was that they want to keep the ICBMs because of a couple of reasons, right? One, it was a, quote, large and persistent deterrent force, which, let's be real, submarines are better than that. And they're better because, we could just lie. We have 100 subs in the Pacific Ocean right now, and we have 1,000, nuclear weapons. Do you know? No. Like, can you prove that? No. Isn't that pretty deterring? Just like it's kind of like do you want to try? I think that's a better argument. But so it's apparently a large and persistent deterrent force, which is not true. And it provided a widely dispersed silo that are essentially impossible targeting problem to potential adversaries. That's only partly true. The fact that I can Google where these are makes it so that they're not impossible to target. The only thing that makes them impossible to target is that there's so damn many of them, right? Like there's just strength in numbers in that respect. But again, I can still see them all. And another one is it's a timely response option. This is, again, an argument out of the 50s, right? We can contact somebody in a nuclear submarine in seconds to launch a missile. We don't need to fire an ICBM to get a fast response. And then providing a force that can only be destroyed by a large-scale nuclear attack. Okay, that's true. But they also talk about jobs, right? And the thing that I learned from Christian when we had him on was that, when they work out the numbers on how many jobs did the F-35 bring to Montana, or when they talk about, how many jobs did keeping, 500, missile silos in Wyoming, how many jobs did that bring? They include the jobs of, obviously, the people who work on the bases, but they also include stupid shit like, Betty, who works at the diner across the street from the missile silo, that's a job that it created when Betty was already working there. But because Betty is working there and maybe somebody goes to the diner once a week to eat something, technically we brought jobs to the diner. Which is just dumb.
Well, some of these bases, though, they employ a lot of people. So the Francis E. Warren Air Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, that's the largest employer in the entire state.
Yeah.
So these military
but again,
bases
we're talking about Wyoming, man. Wyoming is such a small population that it's not hard to be the biggest employer in a state with fewer citizens than
there's only two other jobs in Wyoming. There's ski instructors and ranchers. No. Ski instructors and ranchers.
We're talking about Wyoming. Like Wyoming has smaller population than Brooklyn. You know what I mean? It's not particularly hard to be the biggest employer.
What is the population of Wyoming? Is it less than 1 million people?
I'm gonna find out.
It is, right?
I think it's 800,000. I want to say Wyoming population. Let's find out. Tell you, doing it live. Wow, less 578,759 as of 2019. We're talking about just over 500,000 people. How many population of Brooklyn?
Brooklyn has a population of 2.5 million people.
2.59 million, yeah. So we are.
Wow, I was on the mark. 5
times bigger than Wyoming's population. That's not to underscore I'm not trying to say that Wyoming sucks or anything like that. I'm just saying there's not nearly that many people, and so being the biggest employer in that area isn't an impressive statistic. What did they employ 1,000 people? You know what I mean?
No, I know what you're saying, but it's still a significant amount of the population if it's their biggest employer.
Yeah.
Whether it be 1,000 person, it's more of the per capita. It's the percentage of people who are employed within that state are employed by that air base. So there is some interest there.
I mean, the question becomes, because this is kind of a chicken and the egg, right? Those bases weren't there forever. They weren't always there. Whole communities of people sprung up in those areas around these industries, right? And the only reason why they stay, arguably, according to the senators, is because of those bases, right? But just why not repurpose the bases to do something else?
The problem with these states, and I have nothing against these states. I mean, they're beautiful places, and everyone in these who lives in Wyoming and North Dakota and South Dakota are all super nice. The biggest problem with these states, they're so remote.
Right.
Like, it just takes so fucking long to get there. Like, we're spoiled because we live on the East Coast, so
right.
We can drive really anywhere within a day.
Right.
Like, we can get to Boston within 5 hours. We can get down to Washington, D.C. within 4.5 hours. We can get down to even Florida in, like, I don't know, maybe like 15 hours.
Yeah.
A 15-hour and a speedy trip.
Mm-hmm.
Getting to, like, Rapid City in South Dakota to like, Jackson, that's hours. It's hours, man. There's just so much space between their population centers where they're islands. They're essentially islands.
It just seems like if we're going to pour a shit ton of money, taxpayer money, frankly, into weapons that are mostly obsolete, kind of expensive, money suck, and we have better options available just so that we can prop up the economies of, certain communities, like, I'd rather just invest that money into those communities directly and in a different way. It's not about the money for me, Like, and I understand how earmark spending works, right? It's kind of like if you don't have, if there's not something there earmarked, in the budget for you to spend the money in those places, then you're just not going to get the money. But, like, I'd prefer that we weren't endangering the lives of the people that live there, as a nuclear sponge. Because let's be real, they're bait. Like, if you live in those states, if you live in those areas, you are literally bait. You're nuclear bait.
Here's the thing, though.
I'd rather just give them money.
They're 100%. They are bait. They are.
I'd rather just give them money to do something else.
They are bait, but I feel like, there's enough nukes to go around where we're gonna get ours as well.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't think we're spared.
It's not like a good feeling to
I
have,
think that after
we
spreading out nukes across the upper Midwest, there'll probably be a couple to spare for one big fat one.
Yeah.
At the Statue of Liberty.
Oh yeah, we're dead. Like, let's be real. Nuclear war, we're definitely dead. You and I, we're dead in
like, why wouldn't you take out New York?
Yeah, we're dead in a couple hours.
That's something like parents will always say, is like to their kids when they move to New York. It's like, are you sure you want to move to New York? If there's ever an attack, New York will be the first place to go.
And they're not wrong, but like also the likelihood that happens is like super
New York or Washington D.C.
Yeah,
that's the likelihood.
Again, I would just rather spend the money, like, repurchase with money. Let's get some new nuclear subs, because let's be real, they're about to be decommissioned, or they're about to go expired. We need new subs, and those clearly from a strategic, position, they're just much better. And then, I'm not saying, wreck the economies of Wyoming. I'm saying maybe instead of propping them up with a nuclear missile silo, we do something else. I don't know what that something else is, but you can have all of the money that we used to spend.
There are case studies of military bases leaving and different cities like creating office spaces in like the former military bases, and them attracting more business.
Well,
in San Francisco, there's a famous case, but
here in Brooklyn, there's the Navy Yards. The Brooklyn Navy Yards is like a giant office complex where there's plenty of businesses that they have a Wegmans in the Navy Yards.
Yeah, but the economies in Brooklyn and
I know
San
it's
Francisco
different, but
are a little bit different than the economies in like Cheyenne, Wyoming.
It's different. What I'm proposing is let's keep the money going to those places, but just stop using the money to make them bait. Just do anything else.
It's interesting though. It's just like a very interesting dynamic to think about. Like, it's not only the politicians who represent those areas, and I don't know what the general population. I'm assuming that most people don't really know about this stuff.
Yeah, most likely
don't really know about the concept. And like, it's not something. Whenever we say most people don't know, it's never something to be ashamed of or anything like that.
Right.
I mean, like I don't know about a lot of stuff as well.
Right.
There's just some weird interest that we have. But yeah, it's just a very weird.
It's weird. It's weird and it's
just
outdated.
weird. It's just a weird policy. Like, it's just a weird policy.
It's weird
that we have this politicians lobbying for or politicians endorsing that their states be the target for a nuclear.
It would be like if Japan's
war?
Defense forces still had a policy of committing seppuku if you if you lost your honor in some way. You know what I mean? It's just like, why are we still doing that? And also, that's kind of dumb, Like, why are we still doing this?
I know the biggest point though, that, like, you can make strategic sense if like these ICBMs are the most effective targets, but like they're not even the most effective targets. That's the thing. Like, the submarines are the way to go.
Yeah.
If we're going to declare a worldwide nuclear holocaust, why not just use our submarines?
Yep. Yeah, and I like it better because then we could just straight up lie, right? We could just straight up lie. Like, we just say we have... We could be like Commodore Perry. Remember from the episode that we did in Japan and how he just straight up lied to the Japanese about how many ships we had? We just lie. We have 200 nuclear-powered submarines in the water. And, you want to call us out on it and try us? Because maybe we do, maybe we don't. But if I'm right, you're fucked. So I feel like that's more threatening. Go with the Putin route. Don't be explicit about your threats. Just be implicit.
I like how you tied it all back with Putin.
Mm-hmm. That's how Putin would do it.
All right, I have nothing else to say about this topic.
Neither do I. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed us ranting about.
Oh, all right. Wait, we do have one more thing to say.
Sure.
So we are going to continue what we did last week on Patreon. We are going to actually go on the nuclear map. We're going to make a video for our Patreon members of us going over these locations of where the
missiles at.
Sponges are in the U.S. and then I guess playing around with the nuclear map to see their blast radiuses and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
All right, so join us on Patreon to look at that video, to join us there, and then make sure that you rate and review the podcast. Rating and reviewing the podcast is the number one way to help us continue to grow. We are at like 492 or 93 reviews. Why don't you help us get to 500 reviews on Apple? That would be really swell.
Yeah,
it would be a nice accomplishment for us. So rate and review the podcast if you are on Apple. And other than that, do you have anything else to say?
No, man.
All right. Peace, everyone. If you guys are listening to this, it's Sunday, and we made it from Thursday to Sunday. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we will see you next week.
Peace.
Peace.